The grand doors of Ashford Manor burst open on a storm-lashed evening, revealing a trembling young woman drenched to the bone, her eyes wild with terror. "May I stay? He is following me," she gasped, reaching toward the Duke with desperate hands. Duke Ashford, master of one of England's most formidable estates, regarded her with cold skepticism. Another fortune hunter, no doubt, spinning tales to gain entry to his world. He turned her away into the tempest without a second thought. But when dawn broke the next morning, 50 royal guards surrounded his manor, their captain demanding answers about the girl he'd dismissed so carelessly. The woman he'd refused wasn't a scheming opportunist. She was Lady Penelope Hartwell, the king's missing ward, fleeing a conspiracy that reached the highest corridors of power. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. Duke Theodore Ashford stood at the rain-streaked windows of his study, watching the Yorkshire moors disappear beneath sheets of grey rainfall. At 32, he had perfected the art of isolation, transforming Ashford Manor into an impenetrable fortress against the machinations of society. The year was 1838, and while Queen Victoria's reign promised a new era of progress, Theodore remained anchored in the cynicism earned through bitter experience. His reflection in the glass showed a man of severe handsomeness, dark hair swept back from a high forehead, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of winter steel. Those eyes had learned to see through pretense, to detect the calculated flutter of eyelashes, the rehearsed stumble that might throw a young lady into his arms. He had witnessed every trick, endured every scheme designed to ensnare one of England's wealthiest and most eligible peers. "Your Grace, the evening post has arrived," announced Grimsby, his aging butler, entering with characteristic discretion. The silver salver bore only 2 letters, a refreshing change from the avalanche of invitations that had once plagued him. Theodore took the correspondence without enthusiasm. One letter bore the royal seal, which he opened with practiced efficiency. His jaw tightened as he read the formal request for him to attend the upcoming season in London, to fulfill his duties to crown and country by establishing a suitable alliance. The king himself suggested Lady Charlotte Pemberton, daughter of the Lord Chancellor, as an appropriate match. "Appropriate," Theodore muttered, the word tasting of ash. Lady Charlotte was beautiful, accomplished, and possessed a dowry that would make even his substantial fortune seem modest. She was also, by all accounts, as cold and calculating as a banker's ledger. Their union would be a merger of power, nothing more, exactly the sort of bloodless arrangement that made his soul recoil. He had loved once, in his youth, with the reckless abandon of a man who believed in fairy tales. Miss Eleanor Ashton had seemed different from the other debutantes, genuine, warm, interested in his thoughts rather than his title. For 6 months he had courted her with poetry and passion, imagining a future filled with companionship and affection. The memory of discovering her true nature still burned. He had arrived early at her family's London townhouse, hoping to surprise her with tickets to the opera. Instead, he had overheard her conversation with her mother through the partially open drawing-room door. "Must you continue this charade much longer, Eleanor? The man is tedious beyond measure. Only until the ring is on my finger, Mamma. Once we're wed, I shall have his fortune and his houses, and he can bury himself in his dusty books while I enjoy London properly." Their laughter had followed him down the stairs, each peal a knife to his heart. He had ended the courtship that very day, watching Eleanor's mask of affection crack to reveal fury beneath. She had married a viscount within the year, a man with half Theodore's wealth, but twice his willingness to be cuckolded. Since then, Theodore had built walls higher than those surrounding his estate. He attended only the most essential social functions, deflected every maternal scheme to thrust daughters in his path, and cultivated a reputation for cold disdain that kept the fortune hunters at bay. Let them call him the Ice Duke. He preferred frost to the burning humiliation of misplaced trust. A crack of thunder shook the window panes, pulling him from his reverie. The storm had intensified, transforming the autumn evening into something primordial and fierce. He should have felt safe here, in his sanctuary of stone and solitude, but an inexplicable unease prickled along his spine. "Grimsby, ensure all the shutters are secured," he ordered, turning from the window. "This storm will worsen before it improves." "Already attended to, Your Grace, though I must say I cannot recall a tempest quite this violent in all my years at Ashford." Theodore returned to his desk, attempting to focus on correspondence from his steward regarding crop yields and tenant concerns. He prided himself on being a responsible landlord, even if he was a reluctant peer. The people who worked his lands deserved his attention and care, unlike the parasites who populated London's ballrooms. The clock had just chimed 9 when a tremendous pounding echoed through the manor. Theodore's head snapped up, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol he kept in his desk drawer. No one travelled these moors in such weather, not unless pursued by demons or desperation. Grimsby appeared moments later, his usually impassive face showing rare concern. "Your Grace, there is a young woman at the door. She appears to be in considerable distress." "A young woman? Alone? In this storm?" Theodore's suspicion flared immediately. How convenient. No doubt her carriage has suffered a miraculous breakdown, within walking distance of one of England's wealthiest estates. "She does seem genuinely frightened, Your Grace." "They always do, Grimsby. That is rather the point." Theodore rose, his expression hardening. "I shall handle this myself." He strode through the manor's corridors, his footsteps echoing off marble floors and wood-panelled walls. The entrance hall was a cathedral of shadows, lit only by the guttering candles in their wall sconces. Rain hammered against the great doors like an invading army. Theodore pulled the door open with more force than necessary, prepared to deliver a cutting dismissal. The words died on his lips. The young woman on his threshold was not the polished debutante he had expected. Her travelling cloak hung in tatters. Her hair, a remarkable shade of auburn, plastered to her skull by rain and mud. Her dress, though quality beneath the filth, was torn at the shoulder, but it was her eyes that gave him pause, wide, green, and filled with a terror so genuine it seemed to reach through his carefully constructed defences. "Please," she gasped, her voice raw. "May I stay? He's following me. I saw his men on the road. They will kill me if they find me here." Theodore's jaw clenched. The performance was excellent. He would grant her that. The trembling hands, the breathless delivery, the artful disarray of her appearance, all calculated to appeal to masculine protective instincts. But he had not survived a decade of social warfare by succumbing to pretty faces and dramatic tales. "Madam, I do not know what game you are playing, but you have chosen the wrong mark," he said coldly. "There are no pursuers. There is only a fortune hunter desperate enough to brave a storm and clever enough to manufacture a tale of danger. I suggest you return to whatever coaching inn spawned this scheme and inform your confederates that the Duke of Ashford is not so easily deceived." "No, you do not understand," she began, reaching toward him with mud-caked hands. "I understand perfectly." He stepped back, his expression glacial. "Good evening, madam. Grimsby, close the door." "Your Grace, perhaps we should at least—" the butler ventured. "Close the door." The last thing Theodore saw before the heavy oak shut was the young woman's face, shock and desperation warring with something that might have been genuine fear. Then she was gone, swallowed by the storm and the darkness beyond his threshold. He turned away, ignoring the uncomfortable twist in his chest. He had made the right decision. He had protected himself from yet another scheme. The alternative, allowing himself to be manipulated by a clever actress, was unthinkable. "Shall I prepare a search party, Your Grace?" Grimsby asked quietly, "in case she truly is in danger?" "No. She will find her way back to wherever she came from. They always do." Theodore's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I am retiring for the evening. See that I am not disturbed." He climbed the grand staircase to his chambers, each step feeling heavier than the last. The storm continued its assault on the manor, wind howling through the eaves like the voices of the damned. Theodore told himself the sound had nothing to do with the memory of green eyes wide with fear, or the way the young woman's voice had cracked on the word, kill. He had been right to turn her away. He had to have been right. But as he lay in his bed, listening to the tempest rage, sleep remained elusive. And when it finally came, his dreams were haunted by the image of a woman disappearing into the storm, her hand still reaching toward a door that would never open. Dawn broke over Ashford Manor with deceptive gentleness, the storm having exhausted itself in the night. Theodore woke to sunlight streaming through his chamber windows, painting golden squares across the Persian carpet. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe the previous evening had been nothing more than a particularly vivid nightmare. That illusion shattered with Grimsby's urgent knock. "Your Grace, you must come at once. There are soldiers surrounding the manor." Theodore was out of bed instantly, pulling on his dressing gown as he strode to the window. His blood turned to ice. The manicured lawns of Ashford Manor had been transformed into a military encampment. At least 50 royal guards in their distinctive red coats formed a perimeter around the estate, their muskets gleaming in the morning light. At the main gate stood a captain in full-dress uniform, his expression carved from granite. What in God's name? Theodore breathed, his mind racing through possibilities. Had war been declared? Was there a rebellion he had not heard of? But no, the soldiers' attention was focused entirely on his manner, their stance that of men preparing to lay siege rather than march to battle. He dressed with furious efficiency, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Whatever this was, he would face it with the dignity befitting his station. He descended the stairs to find his entire household staff gathered in the entrance hall, their faces pale with confusion and fear. "Everyone remain calm," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of generations of Ashfords who had commanded men in battle and Parliament alike. "I will handle this matter." He pulled open the great doors and stepped onto the portico, the morning air crisp and clean after the storm's violence. The captain immediately began striding up the drive, flanked by 2 lieutenants. As they drew closer, Theodore recognized the insignia of the king's own guard, elite soldiers who answered directly to the crown. "Captain," Theodore greeted him with icy courtesy, "to what do I owe the honor of being besieged in my own home?" The captain's salute was perfunctory, his eyes hard as flint. "Duke Ashford, I am Captain James Whitmore of His Majesty's Guard. I am here on direct orders from the King regarding a matter of utmost urgency. I cannot imagine what matter would require such a dramatic display of force." "Can you not?" Captain Whitmore's tone carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. "Then perhaps you can explain why Lady Penelope Hartwell, ward of His Majesty King William IV, was found this morning collapsed in a ditch half a mile from your estate, suffering from exposure and in a state of severe distress." The name struck Theodore like a physical blow. Lady Penelope Hartwell, the King's ward. The young woman whose disappearance from London 3 days prior had apparently not yet reached the remote corners of Yorkshire, or at least not reached him in his self-imposed isolation. He began, but words failed him as the full horror of his mistake crashed over him like a wave. "The lady has informed us that she came to your door last night, begging for sanctuary, and that you turned her away into the storm." Captain Whitmore's voice could have frozen the sun. "She was fleeing from agents of Lord Blackwood, who seeks to force her into marriage to gain control of her considerable inheritance. These men have already murdered her chaperone and would have killed Lady Penelope herself had she not escaped. She ran for miles through the storm, believing she would find help at the home of a peer of the realm. Instead, she found a locked door and a cold heart." Theodore felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The terror in those green eyes had been real. The desperation in her voice had been genuine. And he, in his arrogance and cynicism, had condemned an innocent woman to a night of horror that might well have killed her. "Where is she now?" he managed, his voice hoarse. in the care of the king's physicians who are attempting to treat her for fever, exhaustion, and injuries sustained during her ordeal. Whether she will recover fully remains to be seen. Captain Whitmore stepped closer, his hand resting on his sword hilt. His Majesty is not pleased, Your Grace. Lady Penelope is dear to him, the daughter of his closest friend, entrusted to his protection after her parents' death. You may have title and wealth, but you will answer for your actions. I did not know, Theodore began, but the excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears. You did not know because you did not ask. You saw a woman in distress and assumed deception rather than danger. You valued your precious solitude over a human life. The captain's contempt was palpable. You will accompany us to London immediately to give account to His Majesty. Refusal will be considered treason. Theodore's mind reeled. Treason. The word carried the weight of the tower, of disgrace, of ruin. But worse than any of that was the image now seared into his conscience, the young woman's face as his door closed, abandoning her to the night and the men who hunted her. I will come willingly, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his soul. But first, I must know, is Lady Penelope truly safe now? She is under the king's protection, no thanks to you. Lord Blackwood's men were captured attempting to breach the physician's residence where she was taken. They will hang for murder and conspiracy. Captain Whitmore's expression softened fractionally. The lady is strong, Your Grace. Stronger than you gave her credit for. She survived the night you condemned her to, though it was a near thing. Shame, hot and acidic, flooded through Theodore's chest. He had prided himself on his judgment, his ability to see through deception. But his cynicism had blinded him to truth when it mattered most. He had become so obsessed with protecting himself from fortune hunters that he had failed to recognize genuine peril. Give me 1 hour to make arrangements for my estate and household, he requested. Then I am at your disposal. You have 30 minutes. His Majesty's patience has limits, and you have tested them considerably. Theodore turned back into his manor, each step weighted with the knowledge of his catastrophic failure. Grimsby stood in the entrance hall, his aged face etched with concern. Your Grace, what has happened? I have made a terrible mistake, Grimsby. The woman last night, she was Lady Penelope Hartwell, the king's ward, fleeing for her life, and I turned her away. The words tasted of ashes. I am commanded to London to answer for my actions. The butler's face went pale. Dear God, Your Grace, you could not have known. Could I not? She begged for help, Grimsby. She told me she was being followed, that her life was in danger. And I dismissed her as a schemer because I have become so poisoned by suspicion that I can no longer recognize truth. Theodore moved toward his study, his movements mechanical. Send word to my solicitor in London. I may have need of his services, and ensure the household continues to function in my absence. I do not know when I shall return. He spent the next 25 minutes in a blur of urgent correspondence and instructions, his mind only half engaged with the practical matters at hand. The other half was trapped in the previous evening, replaying every moment, every word, the way Lady Penelope's voice had cracked with desperation, the genuine terror in her eyes. The mud and tears on her face, evidence of a real flight through dangerous country, not the artful disarray of a schemer. How had he become so cynical, so hardened, that he could mistake mortal peril for social manipulation? When had his walls grown so high that they blocked out not just fortune hunters, but humanity itself? A knock at the study door announced Captain Whitmore's return. Time is up, Your Grace. The carriage is ready. Theodore rose, straightening his coat with hands that wanted to tremble, but would not be permitted such weakness. He was Duke Ashford, heir to a legacy of honor and duty. He had failed spectacularly in that duty, but he would face the consequences with whatever dignity remained to him. The journey to London would take 2 days of hard travel, 2 days to contemplate his failure, 2 days to imagine Lady Penelope's suffering while he had slept in warmth and safety. 2 days to wonder if the king would strip him of his title, his lands, his freedom. But more than any of that, 2 days to carry the weight of knowing that his cynicism had nearly cost an innocent woman her life. As the carriage rolled away from Ashford Manor, Theodore looked back at his fortress of solitude. It had protected him from fortune hunters and false affection, but it had also transformed him into something he barely recognized. A man so afraid of being deceived that he had lost the ability to see truth. The irony was not lost on him. He had spent years guarding his heart against women who wanted his wealth and title. But in doing so, he had become exactly what he despised, someone who valued material concerns over human compassion, who saw people as threats rather than individuals worthy of consideration. "Your Grace," Captain Whitmore said from the opposite seat, his tone slightly less hostile than before, "I should tell you that Lady Penelope asked after you this morning before the fever took her into delirium." Theodore's head snapped up. "She did? What did she say?" "She asked if you were safe, if Lord Blackwood's men had harmed you." The captain's expression was unreadable. "Even after what you did, her concern was for your welfare. That is the measure of the lady you turned away." The words were a dagger to Theodore's heart, more painful than any royal censure could be. Lady Penelope, suffering and fevered, had thought of his safety. While he had slept peacefully, she had worried about the man who had condemned her to a night of terror. "I will make this right," Theodore said, though he had no idea how such a thing could be possible. "Whatever it costs, whatever I must do, I will make amends for my failure." "That will be for His Majesty to decide," Captain Whitmore replied. "And for Lady Penelope, should she survive to render judgment." Should she survive? The words hung in the air like a curse. Theodore turned his face to the window, watching the Yorkshire countryside roll past, and prayed to a god he had long neglected that he would have the chance to beg Lady Penelope's forgiveness, and that she would live to grant or deny it. The Ice Duke, as society had named him, felt the first cracks forming in the frozen armor around his heart. And for the first time in years, he welcomed the pain of thawing, because it meant he was still capable of feeling something beyond contempt and suspicion. It meant he was still human, despite his best efforts to become otherwise. The king's fury was legendary, but his mercy, when earned, was equally profound. Theodore learned this truth in the tense audience at St. James's Palace, where he stood before William IV expecting condemnation, and found instead a more nuanced judgment. "You are a fool, Ashford," the king had declared, his weathered face stern beneath his crown of white hair. "But you are an honest fool, which is more than can be said for many who populate my court. Lady Penelope has survived her ordeal, no thanks to you, but she has also spoken on your behalf. She believes your error stemmed from ignorance rather than malice. I am inclined to agree, though it pains me to show leniency when my ward nearly died." Theodore had bowed his head, accepting the rebuke as his due. "Your Majesty, I have no defense for my actions. I can only offer my deepest regret and my solemn vow that such a failure of judgment will never occur again. See that it does not. You will remain in London for the season. You will attend the functions I designate, and you will reflect upon the difference between wisdom and cynicism, a distinction you seem to have forgotten." The king had leaned forward, his eyes sharp despite his advanced years. "Lady Penelope requires a place of safety while we root out the remainder of Blackwood's conspiracy. Your Aunt Agatha has offered her townhouse as sanctuary, and I have accepted. You will call upon the lady to offer your apologies in person once her physicians deem her well enough to receive visitors. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Your Majesty." Now, 3 weeks after that audience, Theodore stood outside his Aunt Agatha's elegant townhouse in Mayfair, his heart hammering with an anxiety he had not felt since his youth. Lady Penelope had recovered from her fever, according to the reports that reached him, but she remained in seclusion, seeing no one beyond family and the king's trusted circle, until today. This morning, a note had arrived in his aunt's flowing script. "Penelope is ready to see you. Come at 3 o'clock. Try not to be your usual insufferable self. Agatha. His aunt had never been one for diplomatic niceties. The door opened before he could knock, revealing Aunt Agatha herself, a formidable woman of 60 with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the bearing of someone who had once scandalized society by refusing 3 proposals to instead travel the world unchaperoned. Theodore, you look dreadful. Good, you should look dreadful. She stepped aside to admit him. Come in, and for heaven's sake leave your ducal arrogance at the door. That girl has been through enough without enduring your wounded pride. Aunt Agatha, I assure you I come only to apologize. You come to ease your conscience, which is not quite the same thing, but it will have to do. She led him through the townhouse, its walls adorned with artifacts from her travels, Turkish carpets, Chinese porcelain, African masks that had likely horrified her more conventional neighbors. Penelope is remarkable, Theodore. Truly remarkable. In the weeks she has been here, I have watched her transform from a frightened girl into a woman of extraordinary strength and clarity. She has survived an ordeal that would have broken most people, and she has emerged with her spirit intact. They reached a sunlit drawing room overlooking the garden, and there, seated by the window with a book in her lap, was Lady Penelope Hartwell. Theodore's breath caught. In the storm and darkness, he had seen only a desperate figure, mud-stained and terrified. Now, in the gentle afternoon light, he saw her truly. She was perhaps 22, with that remarkable auburn hair now clean and arranged in a simple style that framed a face of uncommon intelligence. Her eyes, those green eyes that had haunted his dreams, held a depth of experience that belied her years. She wore a day dress of pale blue that suggested recovery rather than full health. She was still too thin, her cheekbones too prominent, evidence of her ordeal. But it was her expression that struck him most. She looked at him without fear, without anger, without any of the emotions he had expected and deserved. Instead, there was curiosity, assessment, and something that might have been understanding. "Your Grace," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Aunt Agatha has told me much about you. I confess her descriptions were quite colourful." "I can imagine." Theodore bowed, suddenly feeling like a schoolboy called before the headmaster. "Lady Penelope, I have come to offer my most abject apologies for my unconscionable behaviour. There are no words sufficient to express my regret for turning you away when you sought help. I failed in the most fundamental duty of any gentleman, and I have no excuse beyond my own cynicism and poor judgment. Please, sit." She gestured to the chair opposite hers. "I have had 3 weeks to contemplate that night, Your Grace. I will not pretend it was not terrible. It was the worst night of my life, and I carry the memory of it still. But I have also come to understand the circumstances that led to your decision. There are no circumstances that justify—" "Let me finish." Her tone was gentle but firm. "Aunt Agatha has explained to me your history with Miss Eleanor Ashton and the other fortune hunters who have pursued you. She has helped me understand that you have been hunted as surely as I was hunted by Lord Blackwood's men, though in a different fashion. Your walls were built for protection, just as mine were. The tragedy is that our walls nearly destroyed us both." Theodore stared at her, astonished by her perception and generosity. "You are far kinder than I deserve, my lady. Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply recognize that we are both victims of people who see others as objects to be possessed, rather than individuals to be respected." She set down her book, and he noticed her hands trembled slightly, a reminder that her recovery was not yet complete. "Lord Blackwood wanted my inheritance. The women who pursued you wanted your wealth and title. Neither of us was seen as a person, only as a means to an end. Is it any wonder we both learned to distrust?" Aunt Agatha, who had been standing quietly by the door, now moved to pour tea. "Penelope has been helping me organize my travel journals for publication. She has a remarkable gift for languages and a sharp editorial eye. We have been discussing the possibility of her accompanying me on my next journey to the continent, once this dreadful business with Blackwood is fully resolved." "You are leaving London?" Theodore asked, surprised by the disappointment that lanced through him. Not immediately. The king wishes me to remain under protection until Blackwood himself is captured. His men have confessed, but he has fled to the continent. Penelope accepted a teacup from Agatha with a grateful smile. But yes, eventually. I have no desire to return to the life I led before. I was being groomed to make an advantageous match, to smile and curtsy and be decorative. That girl died in the storm, Your Grace. The woman who survived has different ambitions. Such as... Theodore found himself genuinely curious, drawn in by her directness and intelligence. I wished to be useful, to learn, to travel, to contribute something meaningful to the world beyond producing heirs for some nobleman's estate. Her eyes met his with challenge. I know such ideas are considered radical for a woman of my station, but I find I no longer care what is considered appropriate. I nearly died for the sake of propriety and other people's ambitions. I will not waste the life I fought so hard to keep. Theodore felt something shift in his chest, like ice breaking up in a spring thaw. Here was a woman who had faced death and emerged not broken, but transformed, who had every reason to be bitter and afraid, but instead chose courage and purpose. She was everything he had once believed did not exist. Genuine, strong, unconcerned with his title or wealth. I think that is the most sensible thing I have heard in years, he said quietly, and I think you will find Aunt Agatha an excellent mentor in the art of defying convention. I already have, Penelope replied, a smile touching her lips for the first time. She has been teaching me to fence. Can you imagine Lady Penelope Hartwell, the king's ward, learning to wield a rapier in the back garden? The scandal would be delicious if anyone knew. I taught her that no woman should ever be helpless again, Agatha said firmly. After what she endured, she deserves to feel powerful. They talked for an hour, the conversation flowing with surprising ease. Penelope spoke of her childhood, her parents' death when she was 15, her years as the king's ward, navigating a court that saw her as a valuable chess piece. Theodore found himself sharing things he had told no one. His loneliness, his growing realization that his isolation had become a prison rather than a protection. You know, Penelope said as the afternoon light began to fade, I was angry with you at first, terribly angry. But Aunt Agatha helped me see that anger was easier than understanding. You made a mistake, Your Grace, but you are not a cruel man. A cruel man would not have travelled to London to face the king's judgment. A cruel man would not be sitting here now, looking as though he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. I nearly cost you your life, but you did not. I survived. And perhaps we both needed that night to shatter our illusions, yours about the nature of all women, mine about the safety of relying on others for protection. She stood, and Theodore rose with her. I forgive you, Your Grace. Not because you have earned it, but because I refuse to let that night define the rest of my life. I choose to move forward. Theodore felt something hot and unfamiliar prick at his eyes. You are extraordinary, Lady Penelope. I am a survivor. There is a difference. She extended her hand, and he took it, feeling the strength in her grip, despite her delicate appearance. Perhaps we might be friends, Your Grace. We understand each other in ways that others cannot. We have both been hunted, both been betrayed, both learned to build walls. Perhaps we can help each other learn to lower them. I would like that very much, Theodore said, and meant it with a sincerity that surprised him. As he left Aunt Agatha's townhouse, Theodore felt lighter than he had in years. The guilt remained, it would always remain, but it was joined now by something else. Hope, the possibility that his mistake, terrible as it was, might lead to something unexpected. Not romance, not the fairy tale he had long since stopped believing in, but something perhaps more valuable. Genuine human connection with someone who saw him as he truly was, and chose friendship anyway. Behind him, in the drawing room, Aunt Agatha smiled at her young charge. Well done, my dear. You handled that beautifully. He is not what I expected, Penelope admitted. The man who turned me away was cold and suspicious. The man who just left is wounded and trying to heal. People are rarely what we expect, once we take the time to truly see them. Agatha patted her hand. Now, shall we continue with your fencing lesson? I believe you were about to master the riposte. Penelope smiled, feeling stronger than she had since that terrible night. She had faced her demon, not Lord Blackwood, but the Duke who had turned her away, and found not a monster, but a man. A flawed, damaged man, certainly, but one capable of remorse and growth. It was, she thought, a beginning. Not of a love story, but of something equally important. The story of two people learning to trust again, one careful step at a time. 6 weeks after their first meeting, London society was abuzz with speculation about the Duke of Ashford's transformation. The Ice Duke, as he had been known, was attending social functions with unprecedented regularity. More shocking still, he was often seen in the company of Lady Penelope Hartwell and the eccentric Lady Agatha Ashford, the trio forming an unlikely alliance that set tongues wagging from Mayfair to Westminster. Theodore had not intended to become a fixture of the social season, but Aunt Agatha had insisted, "You cannot hide forever, Theodore, and Penelope needs allies as she re-enters society. The vultures are already circling, eager to see if her ordeal has made her vulnerable to manipulation." She was right, as usual. The moment Penelope had been declared well enough to attend select gatherings, the fortune hunters had descended. Younger sons seeking her inheritance, aging lords seeking a beautiful young wife, and most persistent of all, Lord Edmund Sterling, a wealthy industrialist who had made his fortune in railways and now sought to purchase respectability through marriage to the King's ward. Theodore had taken an instant dislike to Sterling at their first meeting at Lady Pemberton's ball. The man was handsome in a calculated way, his smile never quite reaching his eyes, his compliments to Penelope delivered with the smoothness of a practiced salesman. He was everything Theodore had once feared he would become, successful, admired, and utterly hollow. "Your Grace, how delightful to see you among the living," Lady Charlotte Pemberton purred, materializing at Theodore's elbow as he watched Penelope dance with Sterling. Charlotte was the woman the King had suggested as a suitable match, and she had not taken kindly to Theodore's obvious lack of interest. "I had heard you were playing nursemaid to Lady Penelope. How noble of you, considering your role in her misfortune." "Lady Charlotte." Theodore's tone could have frozen wine. "I am surprised to see you here. I had thought you would be occupied with preparations for your engagement to Viscount Hartley." Her smile faltered. "That arrangement did not come to fruition. The Viscount proved to be less wealthy than advertised. How disappointing for you. I am sure you will find another suitable fortune soon enough." He turned away, dismissing her with the cut direct that would be discussed in drawing rooms for weeks. Across the ballroom, Penelope caught his eye and smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that made something in his chest tighten. She had blossomed in the weeks since their first meeting, regaining the weight she had lost and developing a confidence that drew people to her like moths to flame. But Theodore could see what others missed. The way her smile dimmed when Sterling held her too close during the waltz, the tension in her shoulders when surrounded by too many people, the careful way she positioned herself near exits. She was still healing, still carrying the trauma of that night, and Sterling, in his arrogant pursuit, was blind to her discomfort. The dance ended, and Theodore moved to intercept them before Sterling could monopolize Penelope's attention further. "Lady Penelope, I believe you promised me the next dance." "Did I?" She looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned in her eyes. "Oh yes, of course. Forgive me, Lord Sterling. The Duke and I have matters to discuss." Sterling's expression darkened. "Surely business can wait until after the ball, Your Grace. Lady Penelope is the most sought-after partner this evening, which is precisely why she deserves a respite from being sought after." Theodore offered Penelope his arm. "Shall we take some air in the garden instead? I find ballrooms stifling." "That sounds perfect," Penelope said with evident relief. They escaped through the French doors onto the terrace, the cool evening air a welcome change from the overheated ballroom. The garden was lit by paper lanterns, creating pools of golden light among the shadows. "Thank you," Penelope said once they were alone. "Lord Sterling is very persistent. He has called at Aunt Agatha's townhouse 3 times this week, each time with increasingly elaborate gifts and declarations. He is a fortune hunter of the worst sort, one who believes his own wealth entitles him to anything he desires." Theodore's jaw clenched. "Has he made you uncomfortable? If so, I can speak to him." "No, please do not. I am learning to manage such situations myself. Aunt Agatha says I must develop a reputation for being formidable, or I will spend my life fending off men who see me as a prize to be won." She sighed, leaning against the stone balustrade. "It is exhausting, Theodore. May I call you Theodore? Your Grace feels absurdly formal, given that you have seen me at my absolute worst." "Of course, and you must allow me to call you Penelope, at least in private." He stood beside her, looking out over the garden. "I am sorry you must endure this circus. You deserve better." "Do I? Sometimes I wonder if this is simply the price of being a woman of means. We are never seen as people, only as assets to be acquired." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "You understand that, do not you? You have been hunted just as I have, only your hunters wore ball gowns instead of carrying weapons. The principle is the same, predation dressed in silk and good manners." Theodore found himself smiling despite the grim topic. "We are a fine pair, are we not? 2 people so damaged by others' greed that we can barely function in society. Yet here we are, functioning." Penelope's smile was wry. "Perhaps we are stronger than we think, or perhaps we simply have each other now. It is easier to be brave when you are not alone." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight Theodore had not intended. He saw Penelope's expression shift, something flickering in her eyes that might have been surprise or recognition or something more complicated. "Theodore," she began, but was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the terrace. Lord Sterling emerged from the ballroom, his expression thunderous. "Lady Penelope, I have been searching for you. It is improper for you to be alone with the Duke, unchaperoned." "We are on a terrace in full view of the ballroom, hardly a scandalous location," Penelope replied coolly, "and I was not aware that I required your permission to take air with a friend." "A friend? Is that what he is?" Sterling's laugh was ugly. "Everyone knows the Duke turned you away when you sought help. What kind of friend does that?" Theodore felt rage ignite in his chest, but before he could respond, Penelope stepped forward, her voice cutting like a blade. "The kind of friend who made a mistake and owned it. The kind of friend who faced the king's judgment rather than hiding behind excuses. The kind of friend who sees me as a person rather than a possession to be acquired." Her eyes blazed with an anger Theodore had never seen from her. "You speak of propriety, Lord Sterling, yet you have pursued me with all the subtlety of a hound after a fox. You send gifts I did not request, call at hours that are barely acceptable, and now you presume to dictate whom I may speak with. I am not interested in your suit, sir. I will never be interested. Please respect that and cease your attentions." Sterling's face flushed crimson. "You will regret this, Lady Penelope. You think you can afford to be particular, but your reputation is already damaged by your association with the Duke. No respectable man will want you once word spreads that you spend your time with the man who nearly got you killed. Then I shall have to content myself with the company of disreputable men, shan't I?" Penelope's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Good evening, Lord Sterling. I trust you can find your own way back to the ballroom." Sterling stared at her for a long moment, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. Then he turned on his heel and stalked away, his footsteps echoing on the stone terrace. Once he was gone, Penelope sagged slightly, the fierce energy that had animated her draining away. "Did I just make a terrible mistake?" "You just made a magnificent stand," Theodore said, admiration warming his voice. "That was extraordinary, Penelope. I have never seen anyone put Sterling in his place so thoroughly." "I may have been too harsh. Aunt Agatha says I must learn to be diplomatic." "Aunt Agatha would be proud. Trust me, I know her well enough to be certain of that." He offered her his arm. "Come, let us return to the ball before your absence is noted. We can make a grand entrance together, and let society speculate to its heart's content." They re-entered the ballroom to find it abuzz with whispers. Sterling had apparently wasted no time in spreading his version of events, painting himself as the injured party rejected by an ungrateful woman. But when Penelope entered on Theodore's arm, her head high and her expression serene, the whispers changed tone. Aunt Agatha appeared at their side immediately, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I heard you sent Sterling packing. Well done, my dear. The man is a bore and a bully. He needed to be put in his place." "I may have been too forceful," Penelope said, though she looked more pleased than concerned. "Nonsense. You were perfect. And look," Agatha gestured subtly toward a group of young women watching them with expressions of awe and envy. "You have just become the most interesting woman in London. Half the ladies here wish they had your courage, and the other half are terrified you will steal their suitors." "I do not want anyone's suitors," Penelope protested. "Of course not. You want to travel the world and have adventures and be useful, but let them wonder. Mystery is power, my dear." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dances and conversations. Theodore found himself enjoying the social whirl for the first time in years, buoyed by Penelope's presence and Aunt Agatha's irreverent commentary. He danced with Penelope twice more, once more than was strictly proper, and did not care who noticed. As the ball wound down and carriages were called, Theodore found himself reluctant to say good night. He had grown accustomed to Penelope's company, to the ease of their conversations, and the way she challenged his assumptions. She made him want to be better, to shed the last vestiges of the cynicism that had nearly destroyed them both. "Theodore," she said as they waited for Aunt Agatha's carriage, "thank you for this evening. For rescuing me from Sterling, for making me laugh, for being my friend when I needed one most. You rescued yourself from Sterling. I merely provided moral support." He smiled, then grew serious. "Penelope, I want you to know that these past weeks have been transformative for me. You have reminded me that not everyone is motivated by greed or deception. You have shown me that it is possible to be wounded and still choose trust, to be betrayed and still choose hope. I'm grateful for your friendship more than I can express." "I feel the same," she said softly. "You have given me a safe space to heal and grow. You have never tried to possess me or change me. You have simply been present, which is the greatest gift anyone has given me." The carriage arrived, and Aunt Agatha climbed in with a knowing smile. "Come along, Penelope. We have fencing practice early tomorrow, and you need your rest." Penelope squeezed Theodore's hand once briefly, then followed her mentor into the carriage. As it rolled away, Theodore stood in the street, watching until the lights disappeared around the corner. He was falling in love with her. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. Somewhere between guilt and forgiveness, between friendship and understanding, his feelings had transformed into something deeper. He loved her courage, her intelligence, her refusal to be defined by her trauma. He loved the way she challenged him, the way she made him laugh, the way she saw through his defenses to the man beneath. But he could not tell her. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. She had been clear about her desire for independence, for a life beyond marriage and social expectations. He would not burden her with his feelings, would not become another man trying to possess her. If friendship was all she could offer, he would accept it and be grateful, even if it meant carrying this love in silence for the rest of his life. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the post in the form of a letter bearing the royal seal. Theodore was at breakfast when Grimsby brought it in, the butler's expression grave enough to make Theodore's stomach clench with foreboding. The letter was from the king himself, written in his own hand, rather than dictated to a secretary, never a good sign. "Ashford," it began without preamble, "Lord Blackwood has been captured in France and will be returned to England to stand trial for murder and conspiracy. However, before his arrest, he made certain allegations that require investigation. He claims that you and Lady Penelope have been conducting an inappropriate relationship, that your guilt over turning her away has led to an affair that compromises her reputation and honor. While I do not credit these accusations, they have reached the ears of society, and Lady Penelope's reputation hangs in the balance. You will present yourself at St. James's Palace this afternoon at 3 o'clock to discuss how this matter will be resolved. Do not be late. William R. Theodore's hands shook as he set down the letter. Blackwood, facing the gallows, had decided to strike one final blow at the woman who had escaped him. The accusation was baseless. Theodore and Penelope had never been alone together without Aunt Agatha nearby, had never exchanged more than a chaste hand-squeeze, but in the court of public opinion, truth mattered less than perception. If society believed Penelope had been compromised, her reputation would be destroyed. She would be ostracized, her dreams of travel and independence shattered. The king might even withdraw his protection, unable to defend a ward whose virtue was questioned. Unless Theodore did the one thing that could save her, offer marriage. The thought should have filled him with dread. Marriage had been the trap he had spent years avoiding, the cage that fortune hunters had tried to lure him into. But as he sat in his study, contemplating the prospect of marrying Penelope, Theodore felt no fear, only a strange, bittersweet longing. He loved her. He had admitted that to himself weeks ago, in the quiet hours of the night when defenses fell away. He loved her intelligence, her strength, her refusal to be broken by the world's cruelty. He loved the way she challenged him, the way she made him want to be better, the way she had forgiven him when he deserved nothing but condemnation. But she did not love him. She valued his friendship, yes, but she had been clear about her desires: freedom, adventure, a life beyond the constraints of marriage. If he proposed now, she would know it was duty rather than desire, obligation rather than choice. She would accept. She was too practical not to see that marriage to him was her best option, but she would resent him for it. The friendship they had built would curdle into the same kind of bitter arrangement he had always feared. He could not bear that. He would rather lose her entirely than watch her spirit dim in a marriage she had not chosen. The audience with the king was as grim as Theodore had anticipated. William IV sat behind his desk, looking every one of his 70 years, his expression weary and disappointed. "Blackwood is a viper," the king said without preamble. "Even facing death, he seeks to destroy. His accusations are being whispered in every drawing room in London. Lady Pemberton has made certain of that. Apparently, she is still bitter about your rejection and sees this as an opportunity for revenge." "Lady Penelope is innocent of any wrongdoing," Theodore said firmly. "Our friendship has been entirely proper. Lady Agatha has chaperoned every meeting." "I know that, you know that, but society does not care about truth when scandal is so much more entertaining." The king leaned back in his chair. "There is only one solution that will satisfy the gossips and protect Penelope's reputation. You must marry her." "I am prepared to do so, Your Majesty, but I will not force Lady Penelope into a marriage she does not want. She has fought too hard for her freedom to have it taken away by scandal and obligation. Noble of you, but impractical." The king's expression softened slightly. "Theodore, I have watched you these past months. I have seen how you look at my ward, how you have supported her recovery and defended her against the Sterling and his ilk. Unless I am much mistaken, this marriage would not be the burden you seem to think it would be." Theodore said nothing, unwilling to expose his feelings even to the king. "Penelope will be here shortly," William continued. "I have summoned her to discuss the situation. You will make your proposal in my presence, and we will settle this matter today." "That is not a request, Ashford, it is a command. And if she refuses, then we will find another solution, but I do not think she will refuse. Penelope is many things, but she is not a fool. She knows what is at stake." Penelope arrived 15 minutes later, Aunt Agatha at her side. She looked pale but composed, her green eyes meeting Theodore's with a mixture of concern and resignation. She knew why she'd been summoned. She had already accepted her fate. The king explained the situation with brutal efficiency, laying out the scandal, the whispers, the threat to Penelope's reputation. Through it all, she sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. "The solution is obvious," William concluded. "You will marry the Duke of Ashford. The wedding will take place within the month, before Blackwood's trial, so that you enter the courtroom as a duchess, rather than a compromised ward. Your reputation will be restored, and this scandal will be forgotten." "I see." Penelope's voice was steady, but Theodore heard the tremor beneath it. "And if I refuse? Then you will be ruined, my dear. I am sorry, but that is the truth. I cannot protect you from society's judgment, no matter how unjust it may be." Penelope turned to Theodore, her eyes searching his face. "Is this what you want, Your Grace? To be trapped in a marriage born of scandal and obligation?" Theodore's heart clenched. This was the moment. He could tell her the truth, that he loved her, that marrying her would be no trap but a joy. But if he did, she would never know if her own feelings were genuine or simply gratitude and duty. She would always wonder if she had been manipulated into loving him. "I want you to be free," he said instead, the words costing him more than she could know. "I want you to have the life you dreamed of. Travel, adventure, purpose. But I also want you to be safe and respected. If marrying me accomplishes that, then yes, it is what I want, but only if it is what you want as well." "What I want?" Penelope laughed, a bitter sound. "I want to not be in this position. I want to live in a world where a woman's reputation is not destroyed by baseless accusations. I want to be judged by my character rather than by gossip and innuendo. But we do not live in that world, do we?" "No," Aunt Agatha said gently. "We do not. But we can work toward creating it. And sometimes, my dear, we must make practical choices in order to survive long enough to fight for change." Penelope closed her eyes, and Theodore saw her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. When she opened them again, her expression was resolved. "Very well. I will marry the Duke of Ashford." She looked at Theodore, and he saw apology in her eyes. "I am sorry, Theodore. I know this is not what you wanted. I know you have spent years avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, but I see no other choice that does not end in my complete ruin." "Then we are agreed," the king said, relief evident in his voice. "The banns will be read this Sunday. The wedding will take place at St. George's Chapel in 3 weeks. Lady Agatha, you will assist with the preparations. Ashford, you will obtain a special license and make all necessary arrangements. And both of you will present a united front to society, no hint of reluctance or regret. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Majesty," they said in unison. The audience concluded, and Theodore found himself walking through the palace gardens with Penelope, Aunt Agatha having tactfully remained behind to discuss details with the king. "I am sorry," Penelope said again, her voice small. "I have ruined your life, just as surely as if I had been one of those fortune hunters you despise." "You have ruined nothing," Theodore said firmly. "Blackwood created this situation, not you. And Charlotte Pemberton spread the rumors out of spite. You are the victim here, Penelope, not the villain. But you will be trapped in a marriage you never wanted, tied to a woman you pity." "I do not pity you." Theodore stopped walking, turning to face her. "Penelope, I need you to understand something. This marriage may not be what either of us planned, but it is not the tragedy you seem to think it is. I have come to value your friendship more than I can express. I believe we can build a good life together, one based on mutual respect and understanding. That is more than most society marriages can claim." "Friendship," Penelope repeated, something unreadable in her expression. "Yes, I suppose that is something. More than I expected to have, certainly. We will make the best of this situation," Theodore promised. "You will still travel, still have your adventures. I will not cage you, Penelope. I will not become the kind of husband who controls and confines. You will be a duchess, yes, but you will also be free. I swear it. Thank you, she whispered, and Theodore saw tears glinting in her eyes. You are a better man than I deserve, Theodore Ashford. No, he said softly. I am simply a man trying to do right by the woman who taught him how to be human again. They stood in the garden, the autumn sun warm on their faces, and Theodore allowed himself a moment of bittersweet hope. He would marry the woman he loved. He would spend his life with her, protect her, support her dreams. It would be enough. It had to be enough. Even if she never loved him in return, even if their marriage remained a friendship rather than a romance, it would be enough, because she would be safe and happy and free. And that, Theodore had learned, was what love truly meant, wanting someone else's happiness more than your own. The wedding was a grand affair, as befitted the marriage of a duke to the king's ward. St. George's Chapel was filled with nobility and dignitaries, all eager to witness the union that had set London society ablaze with speculation. Some whispered that it was a love match, that the Duke had fallen for the woman he had once turned away. Others insisted it was merely damage control, a practical arrangement to salvage reputations. Theodore, standing at the altar in his formal attire, cared nothing for their speculation. His attention was fixed on the chapel doors, waiting for his first glimpse of Penelope as his bride. She walked down the aisle on the king's arm, William IV looking proud and paternal as he delivered his ward to her new protector. When Penelope reached the altar and her eyes met Theodore's, he saw a flicker of something, gratitude perhaps, or relief, or resignation, but not love, never love. The ceremony proceeded with solemn beauty. Theodore spoke his vows clearly, meaning every word even as his heart ached with the knowledge that Penelope's vows were born of necessity rather than desire. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, Theodore kissed his new duchess chastely, a brief press of lips that promised respect rather than passion. The wedding breakfast was held at Ashford House in London, Theodore's grand townhouse that would now be Penelope's home. She moved through the reception with perfect poise, accepting congratulations and well wishes with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Theodore watched her, aching to comfort her but unsure how, trapped in the strange limbo of being her husband but not her love. It was only when the last guests had departed and they were finally alone in the drawing room that Penelope's composure cracked. "I am sorry," she said, sinking onto a settee. "I know I should be happier. You have been nothing but kind, and I am grateful truly. But I feel as though I have lost something today, even as I have gained a title and security." "You have lost your freedom," Theodore said gently, sitting beside her. "Or at least you fear you have. I understand that, Penelope, but I meant what I said. I will not cage you. This marriage does not have to be a prison. How can it not be? I am a duchess now. I have responsibilities, expectations. I cannot simply run off to the continent with Aunt Agatha as we planned." "Why not?" Theodore asked, surprising her. "Penelope, I did not marry you to chain you to England. If you wish to travel, then travel. I will support you in whatever way you need. Financially, socially, practically, your dreams do not have to die simply because you are now my wife." She stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "You would truly allow that? You would not demand that I remain here, playing the role of dutiful duchess? I would not demand anything of you beyond honesty and respect. The rest, how we structure our lives, how we spend our time, that is for us to decide together." He took her hand, his touch gentle. "Penelope, I know this marriage is not what you wanted, but it does not have to be a tragedy. We are friends, are we not? We understand each other. We can build something good from this foundation if we choose to." "Friends," she repeated, and Theodore heard something strange in her voice. Disappointment, but that made no sense. She had never given any indication that she wanted more than friendship from him. "Yes, friends who happen to be married. Is that so terrible?" "No," he said slowly. "No, I suppose it is not. It is more than many people have." She squeezed his hand, then released it, standing and moving to the window. "Theodore, I need to tell you something I should have said before the wedding, but I was afraid. You can tell me anything, he assured her, rising to stand beside her. I am not the woman you think I am. I am not brave or strong or any of the things you seem to believe. The truth is, I am terrified. Terrified of being trapped, terrified of losing myself, terrified of becoming the kind of woman who exists only as an extension of her husband. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. And I am terrified that I have trapped you in exactly the kind of marriage you spent years trying to avoid. You deserve better than a wife who married you out of necessity rather than love. Theodore's heart shattered and reformed in the space of a heartbeat. She thought she had trapped him. She thought he was suffering, sacrificing himself for her sake. She had no idea that he loved her, that marrying her had been the fulfillment of a dream he had not dared to acknowledge. Penelope, he said, his voice rough with emotion. May I tell you a truth, one I have been too afraid to speak? She nodded, wiping at her tears. I love you. The words, once released, came easier. I have loved you for months, since long before this scandal forced our hand. I love your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to be broken by the world's cruelty. I love the way you challenge me, the way you see through my defenses, the way you have taught me to trust again. Marrying you was not a sacrifice, Penelope. It was a gift I did not deserve, but will cherish for the rest of my life. She stared at him, shock written across her features. You love me? Truly, truly, desperately, completely. He smiled, though his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I know you do not feel the same, and I do not expect you to. I'm content to be your friend and husband, to support your dreams and give you the freedom you deserve. My love is not a burden I place on you, Penelope. It is simply the truth of my heart. You fool, she whispered, and then she was in his arms, her lips finding his in a kiss that was nothing like the chaste press at the altar. This kiss was fierce and desperate, filled with months of unspoken longing and fear and hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Penelope was laughing and crying at once. You beautiful, ridiculous fool. I have loved you since the night you came to apologize, since you sat in Aunt Agatha's drawing room looking like you carried the weight of the world. I have loved you through every conversation, every dance, every moment of friendship. But I thought you only saw me as an obligation, a mistake you were trying to make right. I never dreamed you could love me in return. Dickies, Theodore felt joy explode through his chest, bright and overwhelming. You love me? I love you, she confirmed, cupping his face in her hands. I love your wounded heart, and your careful kindness, and the way you have fought so hard to be better than your pain. I love that you see me as a person rather than a possession. I love that you offered me freedom, even when it cost you everything. Theodore Ashford, you are the best man I have ever known, and I am honored to be your wife. They kissed again, and this time it was sweet and slow, a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. When they finally drew apart, Theodore rested his forehead against hers, hardly daring to believe his fortune. We have been fools, he murmured. Both of us, so afraid of being hurt that we nearly missed this. Then let us be wise from now on, Penelope replied. Let us be honest with each other. Always. No more walls, no more fear. Just truth and trust and love. And adventure, Theodore added. You will still travel, Penelope. We will travel together if you will have me. I have spent too many years hiding in my fortress. It is time I saw the world, and I can think of no better companion than you. Together, she agreed, her smile radiant. Everything together from now on. They spent their wedding night, not in awkward duty, but in genuine joy, discovering each other with tenderness and passion, two wounded souls finally finding home in each other's arms. And in the morning, when Theodore woke to find Penelope sleeping beside him, her auburn hair spread across the pillow and a smile on her lips, he felt a peace he had never known. The months that followed were a revelation. Theodore and Penelope became the talk of London, not for scandal, but for the obvious affection between them. They attended social functions together, presenting a united front that made the gossips grudgingly admit they had been wrong. This was no marriage of convenience, but a genuine love match. But they also began to plan their escape. With Aunt Agatha's enthusiastic assistance, they mapped out a grand tour of the continent: Paris, Rome, Vienna, Athens. Penelope would finally have her adventures, and Theodore would have the chance to see the world through her eyes, to rediscover wonder and beauty he had long forgotten. Lord Blackwood's trial came and went, the man sentenced to hang for murder and conspiracy. Penelope attended the proceedings, Theodore at her side, and faced her would-be killer with a strength that made the courtroom whisper in admiration. She gave her testimony clearly without flinching, and when the verdict was read, she felt the last chains of fear fall away. Lady Charlotte Pemberton, whose spite had nearly destroyed them, found herself ostracized by society when her role in spreading the rumors came to light. She eventually married a minor baronet and disappeared into obscurity, bitter and forgotten. Lord Stirling, too, faded from prominence, his railway ventures collapsing under the weight of poor management and excessive debt. The last Theodore heard, he had fled to America to escape his creditors. But these were distant concerns, footnotes to the real story, the story of two people who had been hunted and hurt, who had built walls to protect themselves, and who had found the courage to lower those walls for each other. 6 months after their wedding, Theodore and Penelope stood on the deck of a ship bound for France, the English coast disappearing behind them. Penelope leaned against her husband, his arms wrapped around her waist, and felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Happy?" Theodore murmured against her hair. "Deliriously," she replied. "I never thought I could be this happy, Theodore. After everything that happened, I thought I would spend my life afraid, looking over my shoulder, unable to trust. But you have given me back my courage. You have shown me that not all men are predators, that love can be kind and generous and free. You have given me just as much," he said. "You have thawed the ice around my heart, Penelope. You have taught me that trust is not weakness, but strength, that opening yourself to another person is not surrender, but liberation. I was not truly alive before I met you. I was merely existing, going through the motions of life without feeling any of it. You have made me human again." She turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Then we have saved each other," she said. "Two broken people who found wholeness in each other's arms. It is a good story, is it not?" "The best story," he agreed. "And it is only beginning. We have a lifetime of adventures ahead of us, my love. A lifetime of discovering the world and each other. Together," she said, the word a vow and a promise. "Together," he echoed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. Behind them the English coast vanished into mist. Ahead lay the unknown, new lands, new experiences, new challenges. But Theodore and Penelope faced it without fear, because they faced it together. The girl who had begged for sanctuary at a locked door had become a duchess, a traveler, a woman of courage and purpose. The man who had turned her away had become a husband, a partner, a man capable of love and trust. And together they had created something neither had thought possible, a marriage built not on duty or obligation, but on genuine affection, mutual respect, and the kind of love that transforms rather than confines. They had both been hunted, both been betrayed, both learned to build walls. But in the end, they had also learned the most important lesson of all, that the greatest courage is not in building walls, but in choosing to lower them for the right person. And they had found that person in each other. As the ship carried them toward new horizons, Theodore and Penelope stood together at the rail, watching the sun set over the ocean in a blaze of gold and crimson. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise. And for the first time in their lives, they welcomed that uncertainty, because they knew they would face it hand in hand. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford had found their happy ending. But more importantly, they had found their beginning, the start of a life lived not in fear or isolation, but in love, adventure, and the joy of being truly, completely known and accepted by another soul. It was, they both agreed, worth every moment of pain that had brought them to this point. Because the best things in life are not those that come easily, but those that are fought for, earned through suffering and sacrifice, and cherished all the more deeply for the journey required to obtain them. And their love, forged in the crucible of scandal and fear, tempered by honesty and courage, was the best thing either of them had ever known. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled.